9:30 a.m. when you open for business, and Treasury Secretary Paul O'Neill will ring the opening bell. Dick Grasso, thank you very much.
Thank you, Lou.
We're going to go now to Atlanta for a news update. We'll continue in just a moment.
I'm Wolf Blitzer in Washington.
And I'm Joey Chen at CNN Center in Atlanta. We'll return to Lou Dobbs' Morning Line in just a moment. First, a look at the latest developments in America's new war. President Bush is pledging to rid the world of evildoers in the wake of last week's deadly terror attacks. The president is back at the White House tonight after meeting over the weekend, quite extensive meetings with his military advisors. President Bush confirmed today that he gave the military orders to intercept and to shoot down any commercial airliners that headed toward the White House or the Capitol during the attacks. The massive search and rescue operation at Ground Zero in Lower Manhattan goes on. FBI and police widened the search area today beyond the area of impact after the discovery of a passport belonging to one of the hijackers a few blocks from the crash site. New York's mayor says nearly 5,100 people are still missing. FBI agents are searching an apartment in Delray Beach, Florida, believed to be the home of at least one hijacker aboard the flight that crashed in Pennsylvania. Officials say another suspected hijacker may have lived in the same building. Agents also searched an apartment in New Jersey in an overnight raid there. Taking a moment now to take you to New York. This is St. Patrick's Cathedral, the home of the Archdiocese of the city of New York, and there you see Edward Cardinal Egan greeting with some of the city leaders in the church, a hug, a shared sadness for the city of New York. Also on hand, you see Governor Pataki, Mayor Giuliani, reaching out to each other in this time of crisis, reaching out as the city tries to move forward and go on. St. Patrick's Cathedral at the south. Now to Wolf.
Joey, Afghanistan has a dogged resistance movement called the Northern Alliance. That group controls just a tiny fraction of the country, but it's offering as many as 15,000 fighters to any U.S.-led attacks against the Taliban. For all its fervor, however, the Northern Alliance is reeling from a recent loss of its own. Here's another exclusive CNN report from Steve Harrigan in northern Afghanistan.
Wails and cries are for Ahmed Shah Massoud, the Afghani general who fought first the Soviets, then the Taliban. His assassination came just before the terrorist attacks in the United States. His supporters say the two events are linked, and they want to fight side by side with Americans in Afghanistan.
We want the destruction of the terrorist camps as well as the Taliban establishment, which have provided the facilities for the terrorist activities in Afghanistan.
Massoud led the Northern Alliance, which controls about 5% of northern Afghanistan, and has been waging an on-again, off-again war with the ruling Taliban for more than 5 years. Now they're calling for outside military strikes against their own nation, as well as action against some of Afghanistan's neighbors.
If the United States of America is able to stop the flow of support, arms and ammunition to the Taliban from Pakistan, I think it is half the job.
The Northern Alliance says it has 15,000 regular fighters and another 15,000 ready to join up. The test for the opposition will be whether it can survive the loss of its charismatic leader. Already some generals, fearing violence, decided to stay away from the funeral. Steve Harrigan, CNN, Changaran, northern Afghanistan.
Osama bin Laden insists the United States is blaming the wrong man. In a statement aired on Arabic television this morning, bin Laden denies any involvement with Tuesday's attacks. In fact, bin Laden claims the U.S. consistently blames him for any type of terrorism against it. He alludes to last week's terrorism being acted out by others because of what he calls personal reasons. Peter Bergen is CNN's terrorism analyst, and he joins me now here from Washington. What do you make, Peter, first of all, of this denial by Osama bin Laden?
The denial is sort of a routine denial that fits a pattern of other denials after the U.S. embassy bombing attacks in Africa, etc. If bin Laden is still with us several months from now, I think you'll find that he'll take a little bit more credit for this if indeed he is behind it. And so I think it fits his normal pattern of denying things right at the outset and perhaps later allowing some form of credit to come to him.
Because at some point after the explosion, the bombing of the USS Cole, he did effectively take credit for it.
Yeah, within about 6 months, he was basically saying that was a great thing. And in fact, there's videotape even floating around the Middle East recently. He says rather explicitly that he was behind the Cole, and he says the victory in Yemen and the Cole will continue against the United States. So that was almost a signal that this sort of thing was going to happen.
You heard the Pakistani ambassador to the United States tell me earlier today that her government was going to be sending in the next few days a delegation to Afghanistan to meet with the Taliban leadership and demand that Osama bin Laden be handed over to what she described as the international community. What do you make of that?
Well, it's sort of a double-edged thing, the Pakistani involvement, in the sense that Taliban was supported by Pakistan in the past historically and continue to be. The Taliban are not exactly a creature of Pakistan, but Pakistan was very instrumental in their rise to power. So obviously they have leverage over the Taliban. The question is, to what extent are certain elements in Pakistan's army and Pakistan's religious parties really on board with what the president is saying and what the ambassador told you, which is hand over Osama?
But let's get to the crux of the matter. If the Taliban, and there's no guarantee it will, but if the Taliban wanted to hand over Osama bin Laden to the United States, to the West, could it?
I think they could. That simple. I mean, they control the country. Bin Laden is on the record as saying that he's sworn an oath of allegiance to Mullah Omar, the leader of the Taliban. If Mullah Omar said to Osama, your time is up here, he would have to go.
And do you think that that's a realistic scenario, that the Taliban would turn in the face of this enormous international uproar against Osama bin Laden?
Well, if there was ever a time they were going to, it is now. You know, I mean, on the other hand, Osama has helped them financially and they're ideologically similar and they basically admire him. But if there was ever a moment, clearly this is the moment.
So you think there is a chance that the Taliban, a slight chance perhaps, but there is a chance the Taliban would reverse its course and hand over Osama bin Laden?
The Taliban is not a monolithic movement. There are moderates who are looking to seek closer ties to the West. There are hardliners. Unfortunately, the hardliners seem to be more in charge in the past year. Nonetheless, there is a factions within it that you can appeal to, and perhaps they'll. And at the moment, also, they're talking about their own self-preservation, which obviously changes everything. I mean, the Taliban are sort of on notice. If you don't hand over Osama, I mean, your history as a movement.
Now, you've been there. You've met with the Taliban. You've interviewed Osama bin Laden. You're writing a book about him. We assume he's in Afghanistan right now. Is that a good assumption?
I think it's a very good assumption. Where else is he going to go?
Well, I'm asking you, where else has he been? Where else can he go?
Well, you know, he hasn't been anywhere else since 1996 when he moved there from Sudan. And in a way, once he leaves the borders of Afghanistan, he's instantly exposed to anybody who might be going after him. He did contemplate moving to Yemen in '97 and talked about that, but that never happened. So Afghanistan is where he is, I'm sure.
And if he were hiding out there with the support of the Taliban, how difficult would it be for a U.S.-led military or commando special operations force to go in there and find him?
Very messy, I think.
Why?
Well armed, well motivated, know the terrain. United States operatives wouldn't know the terrain. These people are prepared to die. Bin Laden himself rejoices in the thought of dying in the cause of Islam in his own mind. So you're up against a very well-motivated force. It's not like the Iraqi National Guard, for instance, in the Gulf War, we were basically conscripts who basically gave up without a fight, essentially. I think you're talking about people who will put up a fight if it comes to that.
I've heard it described by other experts as almost like finding a needle in a haystack.
Yeah, Afghanistan is a big country with lots of mountains and lots of places to hide. And don't forget that Osama bin Laden spent 3 years fighting the Soviets, hiding from them. He's not intimidated by superpowers, at least in his own mind. And he feels that his own exertion somehow defeated the Soviet Union. And taking on the United States is not a big deal in his mind.
Now, when did you interview Osama bin Laden?
In 1997, spring of '97 for CNN. Yeah.
And how long did you spend with him?
About an hour, because he wasn't going to hang around. It was quite difficult to set up, obviously, and also there were lot of security considerations he had. We weren't allowed to bring anything that might give away his position, anything that might conceal some kind of electronic tracking device. So they actually we filmed the interview on their camera. We weren't allowed to bring anything, even watches, or just our clothes. And he was clearly a serious man. He delivered words filled with rage against the United States, but they were delivered in a kind of measured manner. This man is not insane. He's rational, his outcomes may be insane, but his reasoning is that of a rational person. Obviously, what he's done is an utterly insane act. But to dismiss him as simply a madman who's mad at the United States would be doing a disservice to a much deeper phenomenon.
Peter Bergen, our terrorism analyst, thank you very much for joining us. You'll be sticking around. And we do have some breaking news. We've just learned that 4 arrests in this investigation have now been confirmed. We're going to have details at the top of the hour. We're also expecting a news conference from New York's Mayor Rudy Giuliani in the next hour. Finally, we'll explore the issue of whether the nation will need to conduct another military draft. Now back to our special edition of Lou Dobbs Moneyline. Lou?
Well, thank you very much. In the 5 days following the attack on the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, the national air traffic system has come to a halt. It has begun, of course, to operate at the margin, just haltingly at the beginning now. But it is, after losing $300 million a day and putting a number of carriers in jeopardy of bankruptcy, it is forever changed as an industry and as a business. Kitty Pilgrim has the story.
Lou, for the airline industry, the news keeps getting worse. Empty terminals for days, losses of more than $1 billion since the attack, and struggling to put expensive new security measures in place. And now one major facility, Reagan National Airport in Washington, is staying shut down. Defense Secretary Rumsfeld saying it's too risky to reopen it because of its location. And you can see on the map, less than a mile from the Pentagon and close to the White House. U.S. Air and Delta are among the main carriers that fly out of National.
The flight paths being right near the Pentagon, the White House, the Capitol building, it seems to me a necessity to close National Airport for a period, and I think it was the correct decision.
Airlines are trying to survive, cutting costs drastically. Continental is furloughing 12,000 workers and cutting schedules by 20%. Delta not running a quarter of its nearly 2,000 flights. United, Northwest, and American are cutting their flight schedules by 20%. Now, a third of most airline costs come from labor, but cost cutting alone won't save an industry that was expected to lose more than $2 billion this year, even before the incident.
I think will be the first of several airline announcements in the first week here. There's going to be Delta, Northwest, American, United, all following behind because none of those carriers are going to be operating at full strength.
U.S. Transportation Secretary Norman Mineta is planning to meet with the heads of the country's major airlines next week. They will be discussing the beefed-up security measures, but also what can be done to help the industry financially. Lou?
Kitty, thank you very much. As Kitty points out, with the airline industry at all but a standstill, just beginning to operate again, when America returns to work tomorrow, it will be a test, and a severe test, of the nation's transportation system. Lisa Lida has that part of the story from Chicago.
Please proceed now to the pickup portion.
Chicago's Union Station is jam-packed this Sunday afternoon. Amtrak ticket sales have surged 50% since Tuesday, especially for long-distance trains, like the one this medical researcher took from Boston to Chicago, en route home to Albuquerque, New Mexico.
It was loaded. I think every seat was taken.
Greyhound also reports a 50% jump in sales, and in some cities near airports, business has tripled or quadrupled. Many business travelers are avoiding the airports, whether it's because they're afraid to fly, their flights are canceled, or they just want to avoid crowds and delays. But there was no crowd at this United ticket counter.
I came to the airport early because they said, be here 2 hours early. And I don't know, at least for me, it took me about 5 minutes to check in. So I've got another hour and 40 minutes before my flight.
You'd never know this was Chicago's O'Hare Airport, one of the nation's busiest. There is very little traffic, plenty of parking, and the check-in lines are surprisingly short.
Hoping for better odds at catching a flight home to Los Angeles, this man drove 13 and a half hours from Atlanta.
I had reserved a car for Monday morning and was planning to drive home to get home. But I'm glad I'm going to potentially get out today because it's my wife's birthday.
Business travelers are usually impatient, accustomed to speedy check-ins and last-minute flying. Now there is a different attitude about inconvenience.
I really think it's a small price to pay for being safe, and we'll accept that.
Lisa Leiter, CNN Financial News, Chicago.
Well, inconvenience certainly will be a hallmark of transportation, particularly in the air in this country for years to come, if not forever. I'm joined now by the man who put the original Sky Marshal program together, the former Director of Law Enforcement for the U.S. Treasury Department, Martin Palmer. Martin, thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
The Sky Marshals, are they part of the answers here?
Yes, they are.
And who should pay for them?
I think the government should pay for it as they had in the 1970s.
Do you find it incredible that this many terrorists were able to board this many aircraft and hijack them and send them as weapons into these targets?
Absolutely.
How could this happen?
Part of the problem has to do with the X-ray system at the terminals, which I also suggest be taken over by the federal government and not have these minimum wage people working on it.
Many people don't realize that those minimum wage employees standing there at the scanners and looking at the X-ray machines, those are minimum wage people, whereas in most countries, certainly in Europe, these are highly paid professionals, if not government employees.
Absolutely. Switzerland, Israel, many other countries have government employees there. It's an absolute shame that we don't have it, and we should have it immediately.
Is there any way, in your judgment, however, that we could raise the level of probability against this happening to such a high level that we would be absolutely comfortable?
Not absolutely comfortable, but I do think with the Sky Marshal program in selected flights, passengers would know it, hijackers would not want to get on those flights. They don't know which.
Should we arm pilots?
I think they could. Most of them are Vietnam vets. They know how to use it. I think that could be done. I also think that the cockpit door should be stronger.
And other inventive measures put into the aircraft to help the crew and passengers protect themselves from hijackers, terrorists?
Absolutely. There should be television cameras in the cockpit so he can see what's happening behind him in the cabin.
And the truth is, when we're talking about tens of millions of dollars for these aircraft, we're really talking about an expense that's really only at the margin.
Exactly.
Airport security itself. We see Reagan Airport in Washington now closed down. A number of airports closed down around the country. What happens from here? Are we going to see that change substantially as well?
No, I think they're being closed down for security reasons, which I'd rather not discuss specifically. Reagan, however, is another question. They're debating within the government whether to ever open it because of the problem of it being so close to the White House and other places.
And the Pentagon
And
specifically.
the Pentagon.
Well, that's, and there is an actual discussion, debate, as to whether or not it would ever reopen?
Yes, and that's the reason why it's not open right now. It's the last one to open.
That, of course, would have tremendous impact, the most convenient airport, and also the hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars invested there. Martin Palmer, it's great to have you with us. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. And as we turn to the terrorist attacks that are leading to heightened airport security, the industry itself is not only being disrupted by those terrorist attacks, mail and also packages are late, they are missing. There is, in point of fact, in some quarters, simply chaos in the transportation system. Fred Katayama has that story and its impact on business.
Passenger planes have resumed flying from the vast majority of airports, but they're still prohibited from carrying mail or cargo for security reasons. So that check in the mail will take even longer to get there. The terrorist attack shut down commercial air traffic for 2 days. 20% of domestic mail travels by air, and nearly $5 billion in checks are sent daily.
People can anticipate that mail will be 1, 2, as many as 3 days later than normal because of the fact that we've taken mail off of trucks, off of planes, and put it on trucks.
Some of the world's biggest manufacturers are also feeling the sting. Tightened security at checkpoints along the Canadian border has delayed the delivery of car parts, causing General Motors and Honda to shut down some of their plants the last few days. Ford will extend its shutdown this week and warn third-quarter earnings will fall short of forecasts. The most affected were express delivery carriers, but UPS has cleared its backlog. It and Federal Express say domestic operations have returned to normal levels and they'll reinstate their money-back guarantees Monday. But one analyst warns they could face more turbulence should the U.S. strike back militarily.
As we grow into what's going to be the new environment that we all live in, it's not going to happen smoothly. So I think there will be some disruptions there.
On the bright side, one sector may have gotten a temporary lift from the flight ban: trucking firms. They moved roughly 2/3 of the nation's cargo. Luke?
Well, as you know, the vice president now saying it's a possibility that we're in recession, and these kinds of effects certainly are not helpful in removing that possibility. Fred, thanks very much. Well, Dick Cheney, the vice president, appeared on NBC's Meet the Press this morning to address a number of issues, but amongst them, the strength of this economy. He acknowledged, as I said, that quite possibly we are in recession. But the vice president, and indeed the Bush administration, they believe that this economy will quickly rebound. Tim O'Brien has more.
Lou, whatever happens on Wall Street tomorrow, the SEC announced late today that the system is, quote, sound and operational. Still, to help public companies support the price of their own stock, the SEC, using new emergency powers for the first time, has waived some of the rules. For example, to prevent publicly held companies from unfairly manipulating their own stock price, they're ordinarily not allowed to trade in their own shares during the first and last half hour of trading, nor are they allowed to participate in more than 25% of their stock's trading volume on any given day. But at the opening bell tomorrow, public companies will be allowed to repurchase their own securities without meeting volume and timing restrictions. There will be no adverse accounting consequences arising out of such buyback plans. Brokerage firms will be allowed to calculate net capital without considering the days the market was closed, and mutual funds may borrow from and lend to related parties, giving them added sources of liquidity. Investors and others can get more information on the SEC's website, www.sec.gov. By the way, Alan Greenspan and the Fed will be getting considerable attention in upcoming days as well. Even before September 11, there was speculation the Fed might again lower interest rates at its next meeting, October 2nd, and possibly even before then. Although normal market fluctuations don't usually lead to rate cuts, this situation is, of course, far from normal. Another rate cut is possible at any time, perhaps, Lou, as early as tomorrow.
Tim, thank you very much. Tim O'Brien from Washington tonight. Well, as you might suspect, this tragedy, this act of war has prompted our viewers from all around the world to share their thoughts with us, to write us, and to email us. Those messages filled with their prayers, their sorrow, and their anger. Ernest Machacheo of Bolivia writes, "If the American consumer expresses his or her faith through purchasing power, then all the mightiness of America will be even more unreachable to the destructive forces of envy. God bless America." Ellen Shaw writes, "I, for one, will not let fanatic thugs disrupt my country or my future. We will show the world we are the world leaders. I intend to hold my equity positions through any turmoil and hope that other investors, large and small, do the same." William Golden writes to say, "One of the attacks was on our financial system. It was clear that the target in New York was for this purpose. I encourage people who have money on the sidelines to invest now and show the world we cannot be intimidated. Also, shoppers should return to normal and make purchases, as there is no fundamental change in our economy." And as our Gallup poll, by the way, shows tonight, actually there might be some improvement. Anything less than this is totally assisting the terrorists. And some very strong words from viewer David Green. David Green writes to say, "Regardless of what happens when the U.S. markets reopen, I am not going to sell. I'm going to buy. I'll be damned if I'll give those expletive bastards the satisfaction that they put any fear or panic in my portfolio. Now, excuse me while I go out and buy a new car." And that is representative of the thoughts that we're hearing from our viewers. And we have just received word from Reuters that Warren Buffett has announced that tomorrow he will not sell a single share of stock. And in fact, if the market does move down, Warren Buffett says he'll be a buyer. That's this special edition of Moneyline. We thank you for being with us. I'm Lou Dobbs. Good night from New York.
I'm Wolf Blitzer in Washington.
And I'm Joey Chen at CNN Center in Atlanta.
First, I want to clarify the latest reports we have on arrest warrants being issued. We have now heard that 4 additional arrest warrants have been issued, unclear for whom. We do know that there are 2 individuals who have been taken in custody, detained as material witnesses. Once again, 2 others still remain at large. A total of 4 arrest warrants having been issued by the U.S. Justice Department. We'll have more on that at the top of the hour. Joey?
Well, certainly, and CNN viewers can expect to get the latest information from us on our air at any time. September 11th's tragedy is forever etched in all of our minds. The images of the World Trade Center towers crumbling away into history. But there is a backstory about the buildings themselves and the symbols they were even before Tuesday's tragedies. Author Eric Darton has written about the World Trade Center, the buildings, their architecture itself, and he joins us now from New York. Mr. Darton, has the World Trade Center towers, that architecture, always been embraced by New Yorkers as really part of their landscape?
Well, not from the beginning. The Trade Center, when it was first built, was almost like this implant on the city. But
because they were so
time,
big, because they were just such an intrusion on the landscape?
Well, if you look at the Midtown skyscrapers, for instance, the Empire State, it's almost as though there are foothills leading up to a mountain range. And the Trade Center stood right at the edge of the Hudson River, and even the Battery Park City development built on it had to sign a covenant that its buildings would be no higher than half of the height of the Trade Center. So the actual anomaly of the Trade Center was written into the planning.
Well, but after 1993, after the first World Trade Center attack, that did change.
Oh, absolutely. I think that for New Yorkers in particular, there was a sense that these towers had come to, in some way, be emblems of our resilience. Absolutely.
You have written that there is something of a parallel, at least in sort of the thinking of the builders behind the World Trade Center project, and in fact the terrorists themselves, and I wonder if you can explain that to our viewers.
I wouldn't necessarily call it so much a parallel as I would point to a kind of similarity of modality of thinking. In order to build the World Trade Center, which was a gigantic structure, it was 10 million square feet on 16 acres of land with 40,000 people sucked every day up into it. In order to imagine such a structure and to actually plan and engineer and build it, one had to reduce the individual human lives in it to nothing. There's a level of abstraction that goes into that kind of thinking that I believe is paralleled by a kind of thinking that would look at this emblem and not see people in it, but just see an emblem. In this case, an emblem to be destroyed.
You, as somebody who knew the World Trade Center so thoroughly, from the bricks and mortar of it all the way up, I guess, you do say, though, that this was a pair of buildings that aroused tremendous passion for those who had an opportunity to stand at the top of it and view all of New York.
Oh, there was nothing like it. My 9-year-old daughter, one of her first thoughts that she expressed to me was her thankfulness that we'd been able to go up on top and see this incredible panorama from the top. There was nothing like it. If you were in a plane, you're airborne, but we were standing on top of a human-made monument. The problem is confusing our sculptural monuments with office buildings where human people have to live. That's a real problem, and we should never go there again.
Well, I have to ask you this then before we go, and it just have to be a quick answer. Do you expect that there will be a rebuilding of the Trade Center towers?
I don't honestly know. There would be tremendous social and political pressure to build something there. It's almost as though there's been an amputation of a limb, and we want to see something replace it. My view is that the World Trade Center's building coincided with the loss of the maritime culture, the river economy, the bay, the great port that the World Trade Center displaced. So that if we build anything there, I feel somehow that it should be a link to the maritime culture, to the waterborne culture that sustained New York from the very beginning.
All right. Ms. Darton, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. Eric Darton has written about the World Trade Center.